city of Decatur. What thanks to Van Langdon for putting together this wonderful program today. By the way, let me put in a plug. Every first Friday of the month, for the next several months, we have something called History First. Have a great line of speakers and fun topics. This is one of them. My personal opinion is one of the very best that we're going to have. Patrick Rasco is going to be our speaker today. Patrick is the Director of Labor Relations at NASA. But if that isn't enough, he is a very gifted designer, a member of this church. He is the person that is responsible for the design and the project management of the chapel. This was originally the 1908 sanctuary in this church, and it has been lovingly restored. Caroline, may I borrow a quote from you? If you say no, I'm going to do it anyway. Caroline Slope is the city's Director of Historic Preservation. She's a specialist in that, and she actually said, I would give this work an A+. Now, let me tell you, she is an appropriately discerning person. She has to be, because things need to be right to be preserved. And I have that kind of compliment is a pretty big deal here. So you're going to very much enjoy Patrick, wonderful guy. At the end of this, if you want to get make a more of a day of it, go to the Old State Bank. I believe we have a food truck down there, Suzanne.
Yes, sir.
Good. We have a food truck down there today, at least one. So grab you a little food truck food. We always get the best of the best from food trucks down here. So enjoy yourself with that. Patrick, let me ask, so is there any way, if somebody wanted to, maybe as a group, do a 1-minute look-see at the main sanctuary, would that be a possible thing to do?
Yes.
Okay, good. So if you'd like to see that, where the church was in 1908 and where it was in about 1970 to the present, just right down the hall. I'm going to turn it over to Patrick Rasco now. Patrick, we are so delighted. Thank you for the invitation to do this, and we appreciate your work. Thank you.
All right, so I'm going to just jump right in because I have a ton of information to share with you. This is going to, it's probably going to feel like you're in a college class. The good news is that you don't have a test when we're through. If you would like, we'll do questions and answers either at the end, or if you've got a question as I'm going through, feel free to jump in on that. And then if anybody wants to stay afterwards, I'll be glad to give you kind of a walking tour in here, and then we'll walk over to the sanctuary. There's actually a little bit of this building in that building, and we'll talk about that in just a moment. So let's just go ahead and jump in. One of the first things that, if you'll go to that first slide, I want to set the history for you, kind of back where we were in 1908. As you know, the cornerstone was laid then. There was a lot going on, and it was a lot different time. Roosevelt was the president. If you're familiar with the Princess Theater downtown, it wasn't a theater yet. It was still a livery stable. So they had some of the, I'm sure, church members here had their horses and buggies stored down the street. Decatur didn't have red lights yet. They didn't get those till 1908. A lot of the streets, I don't think, may have not have been paved yet at that time. So when your membership was coming, it's totally different than where you're coming in today and sitting in, this nice, cool room. And they either walked, came on their horse and buggy, and of course there was no air conditioning in the space. If you'll notice, the windows are actually operable windows, and they would have been raised up back in the day to get some cross ventilation in here. We'll talk about that and the advent of air conditioning for the building. And if you'll remember, around 1900, I think 90-something% of the residents did not have electricity yet. So it was a big deal for this building to have electricity when it was built. And interestingly enough, it did not have, you would walk in and turn a switch on. Back in the day, everything was wired over to the box. So someone would come in early. They would start the fires throughout the building in the fireplaces to get it warmed up, start the boiler, and turn on the electricity at the main box there. Let's go to that next slide. So it wasn't always easy in that time as well. So, going back a little bit to the Civil War, we had a beautiful building that's talked about in some of our historic records, like 8-inch thick brick walls, very similar to what these are, very thick. The inside was plastered. It had a ceiling, which was noted in some of the archives. And one of the things that most people talked about whenever they were interviewed were the pews, how comfortable they were and how well built they were. So in Decatur, the city was a highly sought after location, if you will, because of the railroad and the river. And so it changed hands repeatedly throughout the Civil War. Right towards the end of the Civil War, the Union Army had it, and they had battlements set up close to the river. And as I understand it, they needed a clear shot because the Confederates were coming in and harassing them and that sort of thing. So they dismantled almost all the buildings in town, and so they would use those bricks that were in the wall for their to make stoves or to use for battlements, and then the pews were likely burned and a lot of the woodwork, that sort of thing. So there was no more building there. There was also things that had to be done because people scattered. There were most of the townspeople had to leave because of that. And then in the late 1800s, there were 2 yellow fever outbreaks. So that sent everybody scattering again. We had about 20 members by 1981. And then things started to build back, started growing the congregation again, and we had the Great Divide, if any of you are familiar with that. That's when we had a new pastor that came, and he wanted to unite all of the Baptist churches together in the new town down the street, which is Albany. And so that is how Central Baptist came to be. It was all brought together under one congregation. Everybody but about 25 people left the church. They had built up to 100 and something at that point, and so they were reduced back down. The pastor was gone, the administrators were gone, so it was just a few people left, and they did incredible things to get it built back up and get the church going again. Decatur started a boom in the late 1800s based on the railroad, bringing jobs in, and so there was some growth there, and we built back up to about 104 members. And so by 1908, we had about 115, and they were in the process of building a new church. And you're sitting in the church that was built there in 1908. So the cornerstone was laid in 1908. Go to that next slide, please. Make sure I'm on the right one. So the architect. The architect was a pretty big deal, actually. He was Reuben Hunt. He was nationally recognized. He's out of Chattanooga. He was about 45 or so when this building was done. And what he was known for were large buildings. Like he did maybe 20 or 30 there in Chattanooga. Many of those still survive. And he has maybe 38 buildings on the National Historic Register. So it's one of the best examples of art moderne is one of the federal buildings there in Chattanooga. So if you ever get a chance to go over there and look at that, it's the same architect that did ours. One of the things that was interesting for me was the research that we got to do. Before we ever picked up a hammer, before we ever decided on anything to be done in the building, we wanted to know the history and the why and the how. And so tons and tons of research was done to make sure that we were on point with what we wanted to do. Was able to go over to Franklin Architects in Chattanooga, and they actually worked with Hunt back in the day. It's a multi-generational architecture firm there. They were super nice. They let me go in and they pulled out their archives, and these I'm such a history nut, I loved it, but it was like these really old wood cabinets with the little slim drawers like you have for a map or drawings. You pull those out, and it was plans are gorgeous. They're done by hand, and they're on waxed linen, and it's some of the most beautiful work you've ever seen. The corner is actually a picture of one of those. I just wanted to show you a little bit of it, but it was fascinating. And then, of course, some of the other blueprints still had the ink on them, so when I left that day, my fingers were completely black from having gone through those old drawings, but it was pretty neat. There's also one surviving book that we found from his floor plan. So he did floor plans for buildings, and the way he was so prolific about it, he would make minor changes. Like you might see this floor plan done as a Baptist church with a baptistry, and then you might see the same floor plan, which I was lucky enough to get to a tour, over in Abilene, Mississippi. There is a Methodist church, and so it has the exact same floor plan, and it has not been changed. So it was really interesting to go through that. And we'll talk a little bit about the differences on that in a minute. Let's go to that next chart. So again, we're in the Victorian era. Gothic revival, which is the style that you're sitting in now, was very popular at the time. Neoclassical was very popular. That's why you see so many churches with the large columns, and they look more Greek, Roman, that sort of thing. The Methodist church down the street is Romanesque, and that they have a rounded window there. You'll see a lot of ours have a lancet arch to them. You'll see the lancet arch here, and that's just a pointed arch at the top instead of being rounded over. Of course, the rib vault ceiling is another hallmark of Gothic style, and we'll keep talking about that in a bit also. One of his favorite exterior features we have on this church, he thought that all of the best ones were red brick with limestone trim, and so he liked that contrast, and that's what you see on ours as well. And we had a slate roof originally, which leaked from day one, and so it was eventually swapped out over the years. And then we have some beautiful copper work out there as well. Go to that next. Mm-hmm.
Right there, say it again. Are you going to talk about the old church?
Yes, it's on the next slide if you'll go. So if you'll look here, that little wood building that's sitting in the middle of the street, that's what they were in after their beautiful church was taken down. This is what they were able to put back together. Still having trouble hearing? Okay. That better? Okay. So this is when the new building was being built. The old building, I believe, was across the street. They moved it over so that they could take this picture and show the new and the old. Another interesting thing about that picture, if you look over here, right up there, that's a fireplace chimney that's coming up through the roof. So there were several of those around the perimeter of the building, and that's how they helped heat it back in the day. All right, if you'll go to that next one. So let's talk about the interior. And many people, I would hazard a guess, are not familiar with the Akron plan and the fact that this building was actually built as an Akron plan. I was not, so it was really interesting for me to get all the details about it. And you may ask, well, what's an Akron plan? So I'll tell you. It started in Akron, Ohio, and it was a movement in the mid-1800s when Sunday school came into fashion. I've always grown up with Sunday school, so I thought it was always a thing, but it kind of started in the mid-1800s. And in Akron, Ohio, they were trying to figure out how they could do it quickly, because the way it worked, they had a superintendent of Sunday school, and he would kick off the lesson the same way for everybody, and then people would split up into youth and children and adults and seniors, that sort of thing. And then at the end, he would come back and finish up the lesson. So to make that workable in a quick manner, they built a church that had an auditorium like this, and then if you'll look over to the north wall, and we're going to refer to the north wall quite a bit, that's it over there, and you'll see it has an opening in it. So that would have been in the Akron plan, and on the other side of that opening was another space about this side, and so your pews were done in a curved manner, and they would start in this corner, and they would curve all the way around, and they would go past that wall and keep curving. And so the way that you can identify an Akron plan is they had this giant wall that was wood, and it was, if you look up there where we have the wood on that frame right now, that's the back of where our wall was, and it could be pulled up into the attic. So when you started church, everything was open, and all the people over there could see in and listen to the pastor. And then when it was time for Sunday school, the wall would lower back down, and so you could have classes over here, classes out there. That's what's called an Akron plan, and that's what ours was. Another thing that was interesting about this room is that, and this was kind of a hallmark of Reuben Hunt's plans as well, the floor was sloped. So on the tower entrance, that was the main entrance, and when you came in through that door, the floor started sloping away from that door all the way down to this corner. And so it was really kind of dramatic, really, really pretty. And the stage was over there about where the level of the floor is, because after it sloped down, it raised back up, and it would curve around. Remember we talked about that wall being open? It would curve all the way around from both sides, so the pastor could walk to the edge and talk to the people over there, talk to the people over here, make sure everybody was a part of it. And if you'll see in the middle of this picture, the curved pews, it was very much like that. And then that bottom picture down there, that shows an actual Akron plan with people in it. And those two stained glass panels are the walls that would come down to divide that. So that's just to kind of give you an idea for it. So now,
the wall that would come down, sort of like a pocket door, except it was a pocket wall.
yes. So the question we had was, how did that wall work? And it was literally, back in the day, there were 4 feet on each side of that arch. That arch is not original. We'll talk about that in a minute too. But it was about 4 feet of space on each side. And so it was built in just out of wood framing. And so it looked just like a regular door. And there was a pocket, as you mentioned, and it was counterbalanced. And so there was a button that somebody would go and they would push, and that wall would either come up or come down. Another cool fact about the wall is, remember, the floor is sloped, so the bottom of that wall was actually sloped so it fit the floor and then cut out for the stage when it got to the edge. Just really cool. I'm fascinated by the Akron plan and the fact that that wall is there. If you go up in the attic, which I've done many times, you can still see the edges of the pocket on each side where the wall went up and down. So that's the way that worked. All right, let's go to that next slide real quick. So what you're going to see as we go through these slides across the top, I've kind of drawn out the room as it was, and I'm going to show you the way it evolved over time. So if you're looking at that right now, there's a whole lot there to see, but if you'll notice at the very top, there's an N over one of the walls. That designates the north wall, which is again over here. So let's start with it, and you can see, I mentioned that we were about 4 feet wider back in the day in 1908. So that's what you're looking at right there. And then if you look underneath the little part of the wall that I'm showing here, you can see that there are stained glass windows. So back in the day, you could sit here and you could look through that opening, and then another 50 to 70 feet, and you would see the stained glass windows that were around the perimeter of the building, and the little small classrooms that were set up around it. Now, those classrooms were not made out of regular wood walls. They were partitions, and so they weren't the best for soundproofing and that sort of thing. We'll talk about that again in just a minute. Again, we had the sloped floor. The baptistry was down level with the floor. That was kind of the way they did it back in the day, and so it was much more like you were walking out into a creek or a body of water than what we have today, where you're in a regular baptistry. When it was first built, the trim work was done in a faux bois, which means that if it was plaster, it was painted to look like wood. And if you go into this little alcove later on your way out and look up, you'll see two remaining pieces of the original crown mold that's out of plaster, and it's been painted again to resemble what it looked like back in the day. Also, the paint was pigmented plaster and distemper. And so when the original plaster work went up, it was tinted. And it was, I'll show you a little bit of a picture of it later, it was screaming blue. So remember, this is back in the days of the early electricity. So bulbs were dimmer, wasn't super bright, and so they would use a brighter paint color back then so it would show up better when the lights were dim. And then as styles changed, our first paint color was a distemper paint. That just means it was mixed with water. It's kind of an unstable paint, and it'll degrade over time. But we did find out the color, and we've tried to match that as closely as we can with what you see on the wall now. Our glass on the windows is beautiful to me. Remember, I told you about the different styles that were popular at the time. The windows are actually done in Art Nouveau, which is a competing architectural style, but that's what was chosen probably because of its popularity at the time and its connection to nature. The glass is a cathedral glass, which means it's been rolled. And one of the big differences that you'll notice between our glass and what you would see over in England, theirs is a painted glass, and it allows, if you see the pictures, a lot of times you'll see these gorgeous sunbeams coming through and lighting up the interior. So it's beautiful, but it's hard to deal with when you're trying to read and that sort of thing. So when churches started being built in the U.S., they came up with a new type of glass that diffuses the light. So when it comes in, it's much more soft and evenly spread. And so that's just a little tidbit there for you on some of the differences. And then we're sitting underneath this extraordinary rib vaulted ceiling, and it's self-supporting. So like if you go up into the attic and look at it, there's nothing connecting any of that to the actual roof. It just sits there on top, and the framework is incredible. Giant beams that go around, and they're sitting on, that's why these walls are 17, 18 inches thick and brick. All of that weight goes out to the exterior walls and on each side of the octagon. Let's go to that next slide. So here's 1940, and so we've had our congregation. They've been rolling along. One of the things that happened right after the church was built, I mentioned the slate roof began to leak. So the archives have notes where it had continued painting that had to be done, continued repair work. And it eventually got to the point where that, combined with the fact that the Akron plan that we talked about earlier had fallen out of favor. So what they found was that the process where they were using the Sunday school superintendent to start the Sunday school lessons and then break into the classes and then come back, they weren't reaching everybody the same way, because it was hard to set that up where it was conducive to teach the second part of that to a young child as, you know, the same thing that you're going to be teaching to an adult or a senior, et cetera. And so that plan fell out of popularity across the U.S. Almost every church that was built with an Akron plan was heavily remodeled in the subsequent years, and as was this one. Basically, the only ones that are still existent are in areas where the congregation didn't have the funds to do a major remodel, and they just had to live with it and make do. So we still have, if you'll notice, the floor at the bottom of this diagram is still sloped in 1940. The entire north half of the building, again, we're going back to that north wall, so everything on the other side of that wall got a redo. So they dropped the wall in there that you see where the stained glass is right now. That's an actual wall that was put in the 40s, and that separated the secondary sanctuary space from this space, and they made a small chapel there. It was called the Rose Chapel because it was painted in a rose color. And then they did actual Sunday school rooms around the perimeter. And so that helped them get a more soundproof room there for the students. And I think the adults went into that space from what I've been able to tell. And they took out our retractable wall. So it was taken out then, and only the framework is still existent. All right, let's go to that next slide. So when they put this wall in, there are two doors, and you can still see those doors. Those are original to the building. You have to kind of walk around the edge to see those. But that turned into a children's alcove for the choir. So they would come in one of those doors, they would do their performance, and then they could go out the other one and go back to their classes. They also tried to introduce some symmetry, because after they took that big wall down, the room kind of felt off kilter. And so what they did is they put in this lancet arch that you see on the north wall. A matching arch of that same size was built here. So the large elliptical that you see was built down to this same level in 1940. They added some pendant lighting in the four corners of the room, and by that time the original flooring was hardwood. It was just a kind of a soft pine, so it had kind of taken a beating over the years. So they introduced carpet at that time, and they also introduced the rage in fashion at the time, which was linoleum tile. It was added in the four foyers. It was done in a checkerboard pattern, and it had a red brick-looking border around it in the middle. And if you'll notice, we've repeated that kind of spirit of the tile in what we've done in the 2023 renovation. All right, so another thing that happened in 1940, remember the acoustics in the room at that time were probably not the best, because it was all plaster hard surfaces. So if you look directly up, those tiles that you see on the ceiling were added in 1940. And that's one of my favorite things in the room, because I've seen the building done with and without the tiles. And the way they did that herringbone pattern is just extraordinarily detailed to me, and it makes me feel like I'm looking at one of the cathedrals in Europe. But they did a fantastic job on that. The issue that it caused for me during the restoration, those tiles are no longer available. They're a pressed wood fiber, and so there was a search that we had to do, and we'll talk about that in just a moment, in order to repair the ones that had been damaged by water infiltration, and some of them had actually just fallen off the ceiling. Let's go one more slide, and that's just a close-up of the ceiling. Is what you're looking at up there, but go one more slide now. So in 1954, again, we're going to be talking about the north wall. That's where all the activity seems to have been over the years, but up until 1954, it was hot as a firecracker in here. And I'm sure some of you remember the little fans that you used to get handed out, and they had almost like a little paint stick on the bottom. Well, that was your air conditioning. And so not ideal, of course, and they got together and decided they were going to get the buildings, they were going to bring in conditioned air, is what it was called back in the day. And to do that, you'll see in this picture here, they dropped a wall. They came out about 4 inches from that woodwork that you see there and dropped a wall straight down. And that allowed them to put these giant air conditioning units in at each end. And then they had, you'll see the supply and return vents that were on the wall. Not the most beautiful thing in the world, but it was beautiful to them back then because it cooled off the building. So the children's choir went away, or the alcove for them went away, and we got the walls, which were not really beautiful, as we said, but it did lead to a dramatic, as they put it in the archives, a dramatic increase in attendance. See,
Took away from that time.
yes, took away some nap time, I'm sure, but it did get people coming in. Let's go to that next slide. So this is 1957, as you see it laid out across the top of the screen. It was the second major renovation of the building, and it was huge. I believe it was 53, Dr. Stephenson came and was the pastor, and he was pastor over a time of explosive growth for the church. And so they quickly ran out of space and decided, you know, we've got to do something to get some more space in here and to get more seating room for everybody. And so this is probably, this one in the 1970 are the most dramatic changes to the building. In this one, if you look at the back of the room for just a moment, everything that you see from that wood panel that goes across, that was all added in 1957. It's about 16 feet. So what they did is they very carefully took down all of the stained glass windows and stored those, dug out a basement, and then added the floor space and the balcony. And what that allowed them to do was put the pastor's office and a study in the basement, and that got him out of his study that was over here that he was having to share with the administrators and the secretary and everybody. They were all just crammed in there. That gave him some more space, and then added quite a bit of seating to the room. They also felt like if they leveled the floor here, that they could get more people in as well. And so that was quite the feat, because all of the floor joists and everything underneath the floor are laid in a radial pattern. So they all radiate from this point here, which used to be the focal point. And so that was Fight Building Construction, who I have to sing their praises for just a moment, were the ones that helped us implement everything that you see. And so it was quite the challenge for them to be able to do some of the work we needed done with these radial floor joists and all the other things that were going on. So if you know Jack Fight, tell him thank you for us and how much we appreciate what he did. One thing you'll notice about it, remember, if the floors were sloped originally and this was your high point over here, as the floors began to slope down, your doors would hit at different points. So if you'll see the door that you came in over here, it's the tallest. They were all the same height back in the day, but after the floor raised, they didn't raise the top of the door. So this one, you'll notice, is significantly lower than the one you came through over here. And so that's just one of the neat little history points that you'll know. The stage, again, used to be here. The baptistry was sunken into it. So when the floor was raised, they raised it to that same level, and they moved everything over here. So your focal point is now here, and they raised up the baptistry to the height that it is now to get it, out of the floor over there. And there was a smaller stage here. They also took out the lancet arch that had been put in 1940 and returned it to that original higher elliptical. The organ used to sit out like it does now. Right now it has all the bellows and the equipment behind it. Well, in 1957, they've done away with the orchestra area over there, choir area, and so this is the only space they have left. So they built on a 10 by 10 room that you really can't tell from the exterior is not original to the building. It's in this corner, and they moved all of the organ equipment inside that room. There's still a square on the wall. If you look for it really, really hard, you can see it over here, that was covered by fabric. And so all the bellows and the sound would come out of that room, and the actual panel of the organ was flush against the back wall. So that gave them more space for the choir. There also were flip-up chairs there for the choir members to sit on, kind of like you see at a theater. So, originally in 1940, they were trying to establish that symmetry. So they've lost it now because they've taken out the arch over here, and they're trying to put the focus back on this wall. So the floor plans from 1957 show what I think is really interesting. They were going to take the double lancet arch that you see here. They were going to fill that in and make it flush, and they were going to put trim work on it like the other doors. So it would have been much less architectural. And they were going to take the trim work on this door and the matching trim work over here and put fretwork over it to make a surface applied lancet arch. So that's what you see in that. Go to the next slide real quick. Down here in the corner, that's the drawing from the 1957 plans to show where they were going to do that. Luckily, they didn't, in my opinion. I think this is quite beautiful, so I'm glad that that was saved during the process. Also, in 1957, we've come through different color combinations over the year. Just prior to that, there was a buttery ochre that we found on some of the walls, so it's really kind of a warm brownish color. And then in 57, the walls were painted a blush, which was very popular back in that time period. And then we had red wool carpet. And so there's still some of that. There's a picture I'll show you here in just a minute of some of the carpet that's still existent going down into the basement. Let's go to the next picture. So this is 1957, and that's right after they've moved the east wall out. And you can see it looks like it's always been there. You can see on some of the pictures, there's just a line in the shingles where you can tell that it's been added on. Of note in this picture, if you look in the shade where the tree is, there's a white door there. That's the Oak Street door. So there used to be, in that foyer, you could go through a door and out some steps and be on Oak Street. So we really had 3 entries into the building. We'll talk about that Oak Street door here in just a minute. Go to the next slide, please. So on this slide, on the left, these are the actual architectural drawings from 57, and you'll see the lancet arch that was existent in 1940, and the instruction is to take that out and to open it back up to the original elliptical that you see up there. So I thought that was pretty interesting. And then on the right is the red carpet that's going down into the basement and the blush walls. So an interesting note on the red wool carpet, it eventually developed moths, and one of the ladies that works here at the church went around and put mothballs everywhere. So Dr. Stephenson got rid of those very quickly because I think it was either the mothballs or the congregation had to go. So let's go to that next chart. So again, we've had explosive growth in the church, outgrown the space. So what are we going to do? So they all got together, and Dr. Stephenson again was still the pastor of the church. And it was decided that we would have to do a major renovation to get the space we needed. So this was the 3rd major renovation. And again, this is the one that's probably it in the 57 are the most dramatic changes to the church. So everything past our north wall that you see there was taken down. And so it's there's a photo I'll show you here in a minute, but they brought in backhoes, dug down for a basement, went all the way out to Church Street, just a few feet, and put up a whole new building with a couple of stories on it. Beautiful sanctuary, choir loft, practice area, and then some business offices and regular offices for the staff were in there. So I talked earlier about there's a little bit of this building and that building. So when they took down those perimeter walls, they saved as many of the lancet arch windows as they could, and those were incorporated into the new sanctuary, and you'll see those when you go in there. Remember me talking about that Oak Street door that I showed you earlier? Well, it got filled in 1970, and so whenever you went out into the foyer, you could still see through the plaster the little outline of it all the way around. So that was kind of neat, and we were able to do something with that. I'll talk about that when we get to the 2023 renovation. And then we had the Great Whiteout. So if any of you are familiar with the interiors of churches in the 60s, what happened was over in Europe, England, Italy, they wanted to make the churches more accessible to people. And so they felt like all the high altars and all of the statuary, that sort of thing, was intimidating to people. So a lot of that was removed. A lot of the beautiful paintings were painted over, and that's why you see a lot of white interiors at that time. And that began to trickle over to the States, and a lot of denominations here did the same thing. So this church, and I'll show you a picture of it shortly, it had the same scheme applied here, and it was all white and silver. And we have a picture that I'll show you. So let's go to the next picture. If you see that red line on this photo, everything to the right of that was taken down. And this is a great shot here because it shows you the old fireplaces that were used to warm the building, and some of the stained glass that you'll see there. Go to that next slide. So this slide is standing closer to Church Street looking back, and the wall that you see there and the outline of it is the other side of that wall. So when you had gone through those two doors, those are the two doors you can see inside that recessed black area there, and you would have been standing on the platform for the Rose Chapel back in the day. So and if you'll also notice on the left, right above the hood of the red truck, that's the Oak Street door again that was filled in during this process. Go one more slide for me. This is on Oak Street looking back, and you'll see that lancet archway around the door there. Again, that's where that was filled in. That's going to be important when we get here to 2023. Go to that next slide. This is the Great Whiteout. It's a dramatically different look. This was taken in 1969. Everything in the room is white or silver. So I don't know if that's because of the movement within the churches. It was also the space race was going on about that time. So, there was a lot of metal and silver that was popular. But anyway, that's what it looked like during that period. That picture was taken in 69. Yeah. All right, let's go to the next chart. So in this one, you'll see across the top the way it was done in 1987. So 1987 was not a major renovation. It was a salvation, if you will. If any of you know Jim Odom and June Odom, they were instrumental in saving this building because it had fallen into pretty bad disrepair, because we had the new sanctuary over there, and that's where the focus and the use was. And so this was just kind of sitting here, and it didn't get a lot of updates. So they did a phenomenal amount of work to secure the building, fix the leaks, that sort of thing. One of the really cool things that they did in here, if you'll look at this area proper, there was a lot of damage to the plaster, and they consulted with some people, and they brought in a canvas that was applied over the plaster and made to hold it and also give you a smoother finish. So it's a real buttery smooth finish when you go up to it. That's interesting because if you go back in the children's alcove that's been reopened now, it has the original 1908, and back in 1908 the plaster work was done with like an air bubble in it, and so it's really rough to your hand, and the reason they did that was for acoustics, because that helped break up the sound. And so you can see that in there, and this buttery soft in here, which is really beautiful. They also, in 87, added lighting around the 8 corners of the room that you see, the sconce work there, and there was a large chandelier in the middle. The 4 pendants on the side were taken out. And so also to augment the lighting in 1987, I believe I'm correct on this, I think it was Dewey Lynch and Cliff Bailey crawled up into the attic and crawled around over all of this, and they would cut holes in it to make round holes, and they would use, like you go to Lowe's or Home Depot and you get a clamp light. That's what we had for recessed lighting back in the day, and it was put in by those guys. So I'm amazed they were able to do that and get it in there. So let me see what else. The north wall again over here. Remember how it had that awkward wall that we talked about that was added? Well, in 1987, can you go to the next slide for a second? They put in fretwork over that, and it had little metal screens behind it with a trefoil, kind of quatrefoil, I think, pattern in it. And so that helped disguise what was behind it. Those big units were still back there, and I'll tell you a little bit about those things. They were super loud, just super loud. And so if you were in here and for a funeral or a wedding or something like that, and they came on, you couldn't hear what was going on the stage anymore. So they were not ideal. They did serve a purpose, but they were not great. And so when I was doing my initial research and sketches and things like that, I was a lot of my time in the building was at night and on weekends. And so I was in here on July 4th by myself, quiet. There's nothing, you couldn't hear anything. And so I was in here doing my sketching, and out of nowhere, those things kicked on. And let me tell you, they are loud when they kick on. It sounds like a bomb has gone off. So I was, I almost said something I wasn't supposed to say while I was in there doing my sketches, but I was glad to see those things go. So what happened to those, and we'll talk about that on the 2023 renovation. We were able to move those up to the ceiling and capture that space back. Back on the 1987, also added under the balcony back there were accordion doors, and so you could accordion those closed, and you could have a class back there and a class up here. So those, and then a polychrome color scheme was developed. There was a local architect that came in and helped them with that, and they. This was the same time that the Colonial Williamsburg restoration was going on, so those colors were super popular, like the mauves and the purples, and then we have those same colors in our windows, so they were able to pull some of those colors out, and they did a color scheme with pinks, purples, mauves, that sort of thing that blended in with the windows. All right, and then when all of that was finished and it was turned back over, part of the process was they dedicated the building as the Stephenson Chapel, because Dr. Stephenson is the one that had spurred such massive growth over the years. Go to that next slide, please. So that brings us up to present day. That gets us to 2023. And this was a 2-year restoration. A lot of that was done upfront research, site visits, went to Chattanooga and got to explore some of the Hunt buildings there, and then we were allowed into the archives there at the Franklin Architects to get to see some of the older pieces. So we really wanted to honor the history of the building because it was so old and it's been so revered by the congregation. It had to be done right, it had to be done well. One of the things I talked about before, we were able to move those HVAC units up to the roof, and that allowed us to reopen the children's choir area. And so when we did that, we also had, there used to be a panel all the way across the bottom of that archway over there. So we were able to bump that over to the side wall, and to mimic that feel when you used to be in here in 1908 and you could see all the way to the outside walls and see the stained glass, we had an artisan company out of Mississippi recreate stained glass that kind of mimics what was here originally, and had those put in. Go to that next slide, please. So remember, I've been talking about the Oak Street door several times. So when we could see that outline there in the plaster, we decided to chip that back out to the original framework, and we had those same artisans from Mississippi do a new window there, and that's inset into the actual doorway that would have gone out to Oak Street. And then we had Dr. Stephenson's name put across the bottom of that to kind of honor him for all his work that he did. That's the only name that's been added to the building since the early 1900s. The rest of them are, I think the latest one was maybe 1930 something. The others are predate that. One of the other things that we had to do, was to make this room accessible. And so we added a ADA compliant ramp on the exterior of the wall coming down the hallway, and that lets people get up into the room easily. And it replaced, we used to have a very noisy lift in one of the back corners there that no one would use because it was so cumbersome. So we're really pleased to have that ramp in there. Roof leaks, and I'll show you some pictures as we go through, had been so bad that the plaster work had actually delaminated, and in several places you could look up and you could see raw brick exposed, and some of them, like behind the organ, were still attached to the canvas that had been put up in '87, and when they delaminated, they fell over and they pulled that canvas down with them. So it was a hot mess all the way around. It was getting pretty critical, really. The baptistry, we totally reworked that, fixed the leak. It's got a new hot water system with it, so it's all up and ready to go, and we expect that it will be used for smaller baptisms, like if somebody doesn't want to be baptized in the main sanctuary, they can get it done in here. Knob and tube wiring, I was here checking the building one day at lunch, and one of the electricians came through with this mass of just raw wire, and he said, it is a miracle that your church has not burned down around you, because it was literally the old knob and tube everywhere. So we were able to get that upgraded. We took down the accordion wall. What we're trying to do, there's a difference in a restoration and a rehabilitation, and this is kind of somewhere in the middle. What we wanted to do was bring it back to as close as we could get it to the 1940 look that it had. And so we took that the accordion walls back down, and remember in 1940 they had the children's choir alcove over there. They also had symmetry. So that's one of the things you'll see that we were able to do. We repeated the lancet arch that's over the baptistry on this wall, and had some really, really expert woodworkers and plaster workers that came in, and they did a template for us on the edge of that profile, so that it was taken off of this one and put over there, so it exactly matched the profile. The woodwork that you see up there was hand done, and even me knowing, I cannot tell the difference between the finials that are over there and the finials that are over here. So they did a great job for us. The bell tower, I'll show you a picture of that bad boy here in a minute, but when we first got started, I crawled up in the bell tower to just kind of assess everything and see what was going on, and I very carefully crawled back out of there, because when you look up, we've got like 4 stories of bell tower up there, and over the years the wood had rotted. There was nothing inside it. When you got in, you could look all the way up to the very top, and you're not supposed to be able to look up to the very top. So I got on the phone quite quickly with the pastor and said, hey, we've got to get somebody over here. We had a structural engineer come and take a look at it, and then a floor was added about midway up that secures it. So that gave stability to it and took care of that problem. The stage was enlarged. We had to make the building where it was could be used more easily and more often. And so we have a larger stage now. We had a smoke detection, and so we battled back and forth with the people doing the smoke detection on some way to do it where it was not obtrusive, because they originally wanted to put like the standard pieces you see, and with this type of ceiling there would have been one like almost everywhere, which was not going to work. So we did some research and we found a laser system that's up in the balcony, and it shoots this way, and when smoke goes across it, it'll set it off. But it's much more hidden. It's a great product, but it doesn't intrude on the 1908 look of the building. Go to the next chart. Let me see if that one. Yeah. So in the foyers, remember I talked about the linoleum that had been put down in the 1940s, and then past that, another product had been put on top of that. So we were able to go back, and we worked with a company out of Arkansas that does historic tile, and they came up with a pattern for us based on what we had seen in the building and then some of the other Hunt buildings, and they came up with a pattern for us that was put down in the foyers. We did restore the symmetry to the room that was a product of the 1940 and the 1957 drawings, and that's where we have the two arches on the side and the large arch in the middle, and those speak to the Trinity. That's one of the reasons we wanted to do that as well. I've already talked about the original doors that are inside the alcove over there. To get the paint color, that was interesting, and it actually was fun too. We took samples of the plaster work and the trim work, and we sent it off to the John C. Canning Company. They're a nationally known restoration expert company, and they do like a lot of cathedrals. They do a lot of universities, Ivy League universities, that sort of thing. And so they did an analysis of the paint and were able to tell us, about the distemper paint that was on there and how it may have degraded over time. They gave us samples of the colors that it would have been back in the day, and so we used that as a basis when we did the color scheme that you see now. And this is a Victorian era color scheme. Let's go to that next chart. So on this one, you'll see, remember I was talking about you could actually see brickwork in several places. That's kind of what it looked like up there before. There was damage here, damage in that corner. The balcony was damaged. There was damage underneath the windows where water had seeped in there. The screaming blue that I talked about before, can you see it? It kind of just faded up there on that plasterwork that's still left. Back in the day, you would have had that screaming blue everywhere with wood-toned trim work. So it's appropriate for the period and would have been a really cool look, but they did change that over time. The other piece that you see there, remember I talked about the ochre color that we had at a point? That's what you see there, and that's a ceiling shot, and that's where one of the tiles has fallen away. So you can see those tiles were put up with some type of mastic, and where it's pulled away, you can still see the screaming blue underneath there at the bottom. I'm sure that's not the correct color name, but that's what I've always called it. Go to that next slide, please. All right, so here you can see the bell tower. This is prior to the stabilization, and you can see that the lintels underneath above the windows are totally rotted out, and they're just kind of sitting in there. So those were replaced, and the room was stabilized. Go to one more chart. This is one of the our expert painter, Ken McMillan, came in, and he did the striping that you see around the top corners was added. He did a lot of that freehand, just incredibly good painter. He did the stencil work for us. That was a custom stencil that was researched and created specifically to match the arches, and he did that for us as well. Go one more slide. We're almost finished. We're finishing up here, but did want to point out, remember we had the two kind of ugly vents that were in the wall, and then we had two more vents up at the top. And so what it did, it gave the unfortunate look of a shark or a duck when you were looking at that wall. Is that almost everybody that came in had that same feel to it. So we wanted to address that, and some really pretty metal screen work had been put on those top vents in 1987. So we took those down and kept those, and we're able to rework it into one return vent at the top. The bottom of that piece was found in the Netherlands, and it's from the 1800s, so we had that shipped over, and then we built the rest of that to go with it, and we're able to incorporate the 1987 metal work as the screen there that you see where the air comes through. So that was pretty cool. We sketched that full size on the back wall back there, and then our expert woodsmith took it back and built that and brought it back. Go to that next slide. This is just a close-up of some of the not metal work, the woodwork and the plaster work that was done in the building. And then the picture on the right is showing you the arched ceiling in that room that would have gone about 50 feet out. There's about 4 feet or so that you can see of it that's still existent, and the original plaster crown at each end that has that faux bois finish on it now. And then if you go one more, that's just a picture of the room that we're in now, and that's in a nutshell the history from 1908 to where we are in 2023. So well, thank you. Any questions? Now it will seat around 250, I think. I think it's around 250, I think.
Where'd you find the photographs?
Archives. The church has a room that has, very fortunately for me, there's a whole box in there that's from the 1940 restoration, and then there's other boxes with the 57 and that sort of thing. And so just to be honest, hours of going through church meeting notes, and it really was fascinating because the Pole Hill was the gentleman who did the renovation in 1940, and so I have all his correspondence with the architect that he used, Mr. Gardner, out of Tennessee, and it was really neat because it's the same things that you have today. Like there's times when he's frustrated with the schedule, or he was really upset at one point because the 4 chandeliers that were in the corners weren't here on time, and they had to go and get a different chandelier to put up there. So just different things like that. It was pretty interesting to read. So one thing I would ask for, if any of you guys have been in the building or you know somebody who went to church here back in the day, if you've got pictures, I'd love to see them. Like we've got pictures from around 57 and 60 forward, but we don't have any that have survived before that, so I'd love to get my hands on any of those. So if anybody wants to stay for a minute, I'll walk you around the room and show you answer any questions that you might have, or if you want to walk over and look at the main sanctuary, I'll show you where some of our original windows ended up over there.
You said that the slanting floors were an Akron plan.
Yes.
Was the Akron plan the only one that did slanting floors?
No. So the question was, with the slanting floors and that being part of the Akron plan, was that the only one? Other churches use that as well. And so a lot of times you'll see a rectangular church where you come in and you have the slanted floor towards the front without the extra piece. Had that. Yeah. And so another interesting point about that, you probably already know, but we have some people here from the Methodist Church as well. It's an Akron plan, and it was renovated at some point to basically like ours, where the sanctuary is one piece and then the the back end of it was redone. So the question was, were the counterweights still in the wall? And unfortunately, they took everything out. They took the chains out and the counterweights. So the only thing that's still remaining inside the wall is the chase. I'm not sure what the weight would have been, but it would have to be significant because that wall was made out of wood framing with like a bead board applied to it, so it would have been extremely heavy. I have seen pictures of the chains, and the chains almost look like a ship's anchor chain. They're very, very thick, very big. These pews date from a couple of months ago. So that's a great question, though. What we did, the pews that were in here before were a set of 3, and so we didn't have a central aisle, and a lot of the brides wouldn't use the room because they wanted that central aisle. So we did want to get new pews. One of the things that you'll notice in the end of the pews, we mimicked the quatrefoil that's off of the organ in the end of the pew, and we also mimicked the lancet arch on the edge there. And one of the great things about these pews is they're so comfortable. I was really happy when we got those in to see how comfortable they were. They're actually, to me, more comfortable than the ones we have in the main sanctuary. And also one other thing about these, the way they're set up, that was done to speak to the original curved pews rather than do them all in a straight line. Anybody else? No, the 3 sets that were in here before were straight. So I know we're out of time, but I do want to thank everybody for coming and spending your lunch with me and getting to listen to some of this and getting to talk to you guys. And again, if anybody wants to go see the rest of it, just meet me at this back door and we'll head on over. Thank y'all.